Okay, so we're finally here. Sorry about that. It's the end of semester and I have to get all my ducks in a row as far as finals and everything is concerned, and I was finishing up some stuff with my Fairfield finals. Just took a little longer than I thought. Okay, so I am going to go into a little bit more detail this week about some of the stuff we can do for the preliminary design. Right, the aim is that this is a design. It's something that you could potentially hand to somebody else and have them do the next stage, and the aim is to try and take what is in your team proposal and flesh it out so that we know that each of the requirements, both the shall statements and the use case diagrams, are going to be met. Right? If the project can be successful without meeting those requirements, then they weren't requirements in the first place. If the project will fail without meeting some unstated requirement, then again there's a missing requirement. So one of the things you're going to have to do when writing this preliminary design is checking to see that you've got all the requirements down and that the ones that you have are actually requirements. So that's where we are. I have been in touch with Professor Braverman, who is taking the 498 class, and they are presenting their final designs and their prototypes currently it's on May 13th at 6 p.m. Right, so that is a Thursday. If at all possible, you should try and make that, please. The aim is so that you can, the aim is twofold. One, so that you can see what you're expected to do by the end of December, or middle of December, I suppose it will be. And the other thing is to critique what the cohort ahead of you has done, right? And remember that critiquing is a really hard thing to do well, but you should try to do it as well as possible. You can certainly be critical. I highly recommend being critical, with the caveat that you know how to improve the situation and you make suggestions that reverses the critical comment. Right? One of the things that I've found is that it's much easier to criticize what people do than it is to compliment them on the good stuff. And similarly, it's much easier to destroy stuff than it is to create. And what you're trying to do, and what your 498 peers are trying to do, is create. And like I said, that's hard. much easier to take a sledgehammer to stuff and just knock it down. Much harder to build it up. So obviously in the case of the 498 students, they won't have any real comeback, but if you find something that worth commenting on, but seeing their reaction and them being able to react in a positive or a meaningful way is a good sign. So please put that on your calendars now. In fact, I'm tempted to send a meeting request to everyone so that it definitely gets on your calendars. And just as a side effect of that, that means our last lecture for the year will be you presenting your PDR, your preliminary design review presentations. Okay, so we've got 2 weeks. Just like I did with the proposals, your presentations and slide decks are due on May 7th, immediately after the presentation session. But I'll probably give you another week or so after that to finish your documents, right? Because the presentation is probably going to give you some ideas, even just in the act of creating and presenting the presentation is probably going to give you some ideas about how you can improve. And I'm hoping the audience will give you some ideas about how to improve. So I'll give you another week or so after that to finalize the document. Okay, so that's where we are. The aim is to try and get that working prototype done by December. And there's always a conflict or a tension anyway between, in this sort of a course, between the process, right, and the product. In this case, the process is what you see on the screen. It's all of the interim outputs, and it's the stages, and it's the presentations, it's all of that stuff. But the thing we're really interested in is getting that product out the door, that working prototype. And there's always a tension from a pedagogical or from an assessment viewpoint, whether the thing we're assessing is the working prototype or whether we're assessing the process that you use to get there. And obviously for 497 we cannot assess the working prototype because it's not going to be available until the end of 498. But that's why that part of this course is mostly about, or most of this course is about process rather than product. I am tempted to include in this series of outputs something like a preliminary prototype, right? Because that swings the balance back a little bit more towards product rather than process. But I'll decide that before I kick off 498 in the fall. Does anybody have any questions about what I've talked about so far? Attending the 498, the current crop of 498 students' presentations on May 13th, or what I've just talked about in terms of process versus product?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, very good. So again, what we're trying to do now is do a preliminary design, right? The pieces that I would say go into a preliminary design are the architecture, the high-level design, and then the detailed design. The detailed design is probably not going to happen this semester. That's probably the first part of next semester. Certainly the high-level design has to be complete this semester. It may get changed next semester once you start doing the detailed design, because that's one thing that tends to happen, is these things tend to feed back on each other, right? So architecture and requirements, concept of operations, high-level design. As soon as you start thinking in a little bit different way about the problem, that raises concerns potentially all the way up to the initial concept, right? And certainly when you get to detailed design, same sort of thing. There's a bit of a feedback loop. Sometimes, not often, thankfully, sometimes you get feedback loops all the way back to here. And that means somebody didn't do their job or didn't think everything through. And that certainly happens, right? And that's where we're in the red box here. We need to get the preliminary design done. So I'm not quite sure how to tackle today, so what I thought is I should go through some of the detail of the rubric that I'm going to be using to look at what you're producing. Okay, so this is, and I thought the most detailed piece of that is the preliminary design document rubric. So let's have a look at each piece, right? So the introduction's got to be concise. Usually this introduction, I might call this an executive summary. And the aim is that it tells the story about what you're building in one page, with all the key details. The key details being function, cost, and time, right, or schedule. And it's got to be concise. What I usually recommend, in both the executive summary but also through the document, is to have not just concise words and paragraphs, but split up the paragraphs even with key points as headings, right? So maybe the key objective is the first heading, and then the budget total would be another heading, and then the schedule would be another heading, right? When are you going to finish? Now, obviously it should be sometime in mid-December, but there might be other information that you include, right? That key assumption that stops things happening on time. But I'll try and show you a little later how that comes together. Hopefully by next week. Next week it would be good to get a draft of your preliminary design document submitted, and then we can review them in class, and I can give feedback on all of them during the class. Okay, what else did I want to say here? So I'm not sure what the right thing to do is, but one of the key things you've got to do usually when you're in a larger organization is you have to keep track of the requirements and what you're doing to fulfill them. So in at UTC they used a requirements tracking tool that I think is currently owned by IBM called Doors. Now we don't have access to Doors, but we can just you can do this just using an Excel spreadsheet, and the name, the thing that Doors is it's a traceability database. Right, so the traceability can happen on this. So what happens is there is a an idea, right? Whatever the idea is. And the traceability is then, okay, that idea generates shall statements. And those shall statements generate part of the architecture. And those components have some function. And those functions have to be implemented using a particular piece of hardware or software. So there is an almost complete traceability from this nebulous idea to sometimes even down to a particular line of code or a particular hardware component on a printed circuit board. Right, and one idea is obviously going to generate lots of shall statements, which is going so. But you try and basically as you go down here, right, there might be 1, 10. Maybe this is too much. Right, that maybe it's more what do you call it, binary than decimal. Right, maybe it's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, but that seems a bit small. But the aim is to that there is a bit of a fan out as you go down. You get more and more details as you go down. Don't you hate that? Okay, we didn't leave too much off. Okay, but the introduction or executive summary should be 1 page max. Might be a little shorter, but if it's going to capture all of that, the project relevance, the key objectives, and how you're going to do it, that probably needs a page of explanation. Any questions about the introduction? Okay. So system overview, and this is what I would call, right, so a system block diagram, I would call that a deployment diagram. You may want to make it a little simpler, but you need to identify all of the hardware components and all of the software components that you need in order to make the system. And hardware components is not just electronics, it's also mechanical, packaging, mounting, that sort of stuff. The block diagram should show the subsystems, and the subsystems should be appropriately sized. Right? Part of what we're doing here is we're reducing the level of abstraction at every step as we move down the design V. So you need to be a bit more clear about what's happening on each subsystem. Each subsystem needs to be described, right? And it might be good to identify as part of this which requirement generated it. Okay? And in a larger organization on larger projects, you'll often have people called systems engineers. And systems engineers, that's another way of referring to them as requirements engineers. But systems engineers don't necessarily get into the details of each of the subsystems. What they do is they control the interfaces between those subsystems, right? So, and the reason is a systems engineer may not have any software background. That's up to the software engineer. They may not have any electronics background. That's up to the hardware engineer. They may not have any mechanical engineering experience, any physical hardware is up to the mechanical engineer, right? So what the systems engineer could do is control what the interfaces are. So things like how does the software get deployed? where is the hardware mounted? How is the device powered? Okay, so that's an important list of things that you need to do, and it starts with the deployment diagram. Draw it first, and then explain each part of the drawing. Any questions about the system overview? Okay, let's move on. Hardware descriptions. You need to have electrical schematics. A PowerPoint diagram or a lucid.app diagram doesn't cut it, right? It's got to be something out of KiCad or some similar software that is what you would use in a company, right? So most of them, KiCad, I'm pretty sure has things like Raspberry Pi components. Right, let's just have a look and see if we can find that. Right, it looks like there's an example. It may not be exactly the one you want or the ones you're using, but there are KiCad files there, right? So if you're using a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino, see if you can track down those files. You should use them and include them in your design. We had a high-level budget in the proposal, but now we're going to flesh that out into a BOM. Right? BOM is bill of materials, and it's a shopping list for everything that you need to have in order to make the product. And sometimes you need stuff that is more part of the assembly rather than the actual finished product. It should still be included, although it may not necessarily. You may be able to reuse assembly pieces multiple times rather than just once. Okay, so that is hardware, and it's gone again. Let's just see if I can just kill that. Be a little better, but let me just redraw that. So KiCad, Pi for example, and then bill of materials is the BOM. Okay. Any questions about the hardware piece? Okay, software. Lots of ways to document software. Pseudocode is good. State diagrams are good. Flowcharts are good. Right? The only recommendation I have for all of these is make them readable. I don't know how many times I've sat in on my students or other professors' students who present flowcharts in a presentation, and they're completely unreadable for the audience. There's no point in putting a flowchart up if it's not readable by the audience. There's no point in putting a flowchart in a document if, when it's printed out, it's not readable. Thankfully, most things are electronic, and you can zoom as much as you like, so that's okay. But make sure that the thing you're putting in doesn't get pixelated, so that again it's even unreadable under electronic format. Just trying to think if there's anything else I need to say here. I'm a little more geared towards an object-oriented approach to software. So sometimes I like to think about other diagrams as well, possibly a class diagram or a series of class diagrams. And also something that's useful is a sequence diagram. Sequence diagrams are particularly useful to show the flow of information between different components in the software and hardware. So I might talk to you a little bit about that next week, depending on what you come up with in your software description section in your draft. Any comments about any questions about the software description? Do you all know what pseudocode is, what a state diagram is, what a flowchart is, I assume? Okay. So schedule. So we didn't really have an actual versus proposed, and I'm wondering how I'm going to do that, because I would like to do that. I would like to start project management of all of the projects earlier in this course rather than previously I've only ever kicked it off in 498. Yeah, we'll have to think about that. Looks like my connection to the app server is gone. Let me just That'll teach me for opening it early. Okay, schedules. I want each team to use Microsoft Project to lay out their schedule for their preliminary design document. I want each team to keep track of their schedule in second semester using Microsoft Project. I'm not going to be too hung up on the details, but I do want you to use it and get somewhat familiar with setting it up. Okay? Has anybody used it before? Have you done a project management course where they ask you to document things in Microsoft Project?
I've never used it.
Okay. So it's a little bit of a beast, but you can use the simple things relatively easily, right? And what I would suggest, and what I might do, is I might try and put together a template for it, right? So the most useful fields are the task name, right? So prepare preliminary design, right? And let's start that. Let's say we started it last week, and let's say we're going to finish it by May 14th. Say. Okay. Now the first part I would say is that's 21 days. I do not want to see any tasks in your task list longer than a week. Ooh, what happened there? So where do I want to go? Let's go into OneDrive and 498, Capstone, 21. So this is PDR plan for some reason. Okay, there we go. So what I would suggest is when you have things like prepare preliminary design, which obviously take longer than a week, right, to block it out into things like right, and then you should be able to do this. Right, so now this is a subtask. Generate the template, and maybe that takes 2 days, maybe something less. Maybe you generate a first draft, and maybe that takes 10 days, or maybe it takes 6 days. Let's, like I said, try and keep it below the 7-day limit. And then what you can say is that the first draft has to depend on generating the template. You've got to start with the template, right? And then you can say second draft. Or then you can say review first draft. And maybe that only takes 1 day. but it's got to happen after you generate the first draft, right? So this diagram over here, view, can I zoom a bit? Maybe not. This diagram over here is a thing called a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart shows the time each task is going to take and its start and end dates and its relationship to other tasks. Right, so then you can do second draft, and maybe that's also going to take 6 days, and it's going to happen after you've reviewed the first draft, and then you review the second draft, and it's also going to take a day, and it's going to be 5. Right, and I don't know whether it's another 6 days, and it's got to happen after 6, right? Now you can see one of the things that Microsoft Project does. It's probably a little small, but I hope you can see that the summary task that I started with, prepare preliminary design, has now gone red. The reason it's gone red is because when I set that task up, I said it had to be 21 days long. And now all of the subsidiary tasks, the subtasks that I need to produce that, have exploded and gone longer than what I said. So it's telling me that there's a problem. That's one good thing about using a tool like Microsoft Project to do your scheduling. It'll tell you when there's problems like this, right? And, you know, maybe I can, right, I can fiddle with it and say, okay, well, that means my final track onto producing the preliminary design document it's only going to take, has to only take 5 days. Okay, so I would suggest that we do all of these, something like this for every deliverable in both this course and next course. Now, this course, you know, it's only going to be covering the next couple of weeks, the next few weeks until May 14th. Right? And there's a few other things that need to happen, right? Another thing that is another item that you can put on this are the effectively the deliverables or the milestones, right? So whereas this task is actually writing or finishing the writing of the preliminary design document, this task here is now saying, here's the stake in the ground. This is the design document. And what you can do, and I haven't used this for a while, is you can go onto the advanced tab and say mark as milestone, right? And that will change the they will change the look of the task to this diamond shape, right? And the diamond shape is just indicative that this is a stake in the ground. This is the target date for producing usually a document, right? So then we can maybe bump that up. And we'll try and put that on the 14th. So it is giving me an error still on that final one. So maybe I just need to back that off a bit. There we go. Okay, so there's my production of a preliminary design document, and I usually like to highlight milestones in red or some other colour that pops out a bit more. Okay, any questions about that? Now, one of the things I highly recommend you do is use a thing that in project management speak is called a buffer. Right, at the moment, if we're tracking this project, this is only a tiny part of your project, but if we're tracking this as a project and for some reason the first draft is delayed by a day, everything else gets pushed out by a day, right? And because we're hard up against the May 14th deadline for our preliminary design document to be ready, that will blow our deadline. So what I'd suggest, you don't do it, you usually don't do it for all subtasks or all summary tasks. This top level one, the one with all the subtasks, is called a summary task. You don't usually do it for all the summary tasks, you usually only do it for the whole project, but I'll show you what we can do here. Right, I'm going to insert a task and I'm just going to call the task a buffer. And I'm going to say I'm going to have a buffer of, I don't know why it keeps asking if I want to save. I'm going to have a buffer of 5 days, and its predecessor is 7, and my preliminary design document predecessor is now the buffer. Okay, and then you can see now I've blown my 21 days for my summary task, so I'm going to have to manipulate it down a bit. So Now I haven't used this in a while, so what I want to be able to do right is not set the what the problem is I set the dates and it's trying to keep the dates, whereas all I'm really interested in is the successor predecessor relationship. Okay, and now I can change the used to be set up so that it'd push that out. So let me do that and do that, and then do maybe 5 days for the second one, and then put the successor in, and then put that one in, and then I want to maybe make 4 days. Do we have enough time for 4 days? Okay. And I still don't I don't have enough day for 4 days. Okay, and now I've finally managed to pull things around, and now you can see there's my buffer, and I'm going to make my buffer a slightly different color from, oops, wrong one. That was the start. I wanted the middle color to be that. Okay, so there's my buffer. And so what happens with the buffer, right? Now, exactly the same thing's going to happen. If I spend one more day on the first draft than I schedule for, I'm still going to blow my timeline. But now what you can do is you can reduce or you can mark the buffer as 1 day used up, and that'll keep us on the timeline. And one way to measure whether your project is on track or not is how much of the buffer you've used up versus how far you are into the project. So if you're 20% into the project and you've used 20% of the buffer, that's probably about right, maybe a little high. But if you're 20% into the project and you've already used 80% of the buffer, that says there's a problem. So please have a go at using Project. Feel free to ping me on Discord if you have any questions about it. But I would like you to at least include all of these things, all of these things on as deliverables on your project plan, and then also all the other stuff that you need to do. And what you'll probably have is for every subsystem in your deployment diagram, in your system diagram, you should have a summary task that talks about getting that subsystem done. The other thing you'll probably need is it's one thing to get all the subsystems done, then you need to integrate everything and actually get the whole thing to work, right? So the getting the individual pieces to work is you have some sort of a unit test. Did it work or didn't it? But then you need to put those pieces together and integrate them and make them work. Then you might want to bring the whole system up and see what happens. If you think the whole system is working, then you can start verification. Verification says, did the system meet requirements? You wrote the requirements over here, right? And you've got over here on the back end, did those requirements get met? And then we probably don't do validation, but in your final presentation you should talk about validation. Validation says, does the system you built do what the customer wanted? And it may be that the customer doesn't like it for whatever reason. Maybe you missed a requirement, or maybe the requirement was wrong, or maybe by the time you finish development the product is too expensive. There's a lot of reasons why. You can perfectly verify that the product meets all the requirements, but the customer still doesn't like it. Okay? Okay. Sorry, that was a little bit of I did want to spend a bit of time on schedule because I didn't feel like I've spent enough time on schedule before. So let's just, what I'll do, if I can figure out how to get it, is I will see about I will just try and drop that Microsoft project file into the Discord channel so that you've got it available, just as an example anyway. And what did I do with it? I put it into there and there and there and that one there. Can I download it? And where are we? The capstone materials. Now there are lots of ways to track projects. Okay. The size or the use of the buffer is one. there are also things called, well, there's a system called EVMS, which stands for Earned Value Management System. And it has two measures, one called SPI, Schedule Performance Index, and one called CPI, which is Cost Performance Index. And early next semester I'll talk to you about how to do those, but we need to have a schedule or a thing in Microsoft Project first before we move with that. Any questions about schedule or Microsoft Project? No? Okay. Budget. I think you've all been doing pretty well with the budget. The only thing I would suggest, not so much budget, but remember, order at least 2 of critical components, because you can be sure you will blow one up just before you have to present. Okay, so if you need a Raspberry Pi and you've got one already, order another one. Maybe wait until a little later after you've played with the one you have, just to make sure that you know you've got enough I/O and enough processing power, and that it's power efficient enough for what you're trying to do. Okay. The conclusion, the last thing, right? And it should be, if you like, a shorter restatement of the executive summary. The information in the executive summary should be detailed in the appropriate section in the body of the document. The key piece of each element of the body of the document should be again highlighted in the conclusions. The total budget, the total time, any risks. That's another thing. I haven't talked about risk management. I might see about putting that in as well. It's another thing that you've usually got to do if you manage a project, is think about what could go wrong to derail this project. And maybe there aren't many schedule slips yet, but maybe highlight potential slips. I'm actually hoping we're by the time we get back in the fall semester that we've all moved into the new engineering building. The reason I'm hoping that is because there is space set aside in the there's space set aside for capstone projects. I think there's a separate small room where we can store stuff, so that'll be nice. We didn't have that in Copernicus, but we asked for it, and I think we still have it in the new building. So that'll be good. Okay. I think that's all I wanted to say about this document. I gave you some examples of the last cohort I took through's preliminary design documents. Like I said, there were some good ones there, but none of them were perfect. So I thought I should spend some time today just reiterating what I was looking for in each of them. And that's pretty much it, right? The other part. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if this rubric is already up on Blackboard.
That is a good question. Let me go check. If it isn't, it should be. Alright, there we go. I have not put it up on Blackboard yet, so the answer is no. Actually, let's just check to see whether... I thought I copied it across. Right, so let's have a look at that one. So the rubric is there, but the assignment is not there yet. Okay, so there's a basically the rubric that I just walked through, but broken down into 5% pieces, maybe 4% pieces. Okay, so
Okay.
that is there. Let me make an I don't think we have another. Yeah, so let me make a new assignment, which is the, and I'm just going to call it the draft because it's not going to be finished until whatever I said, May 14th. So don't think this is the only stab you've got at it. Please upload this, get a first draft in before this session next week, and I will spend some time during that session reviewing each project's document, not the presentation, the document. That way, the following week, you should have enough ammunition to have filled in any gaps that I point out when you make your presentations. Okay? And for now, I'll just make it due at 9:30. Is that right? On the 30th, but I'll continue to push it out. So there's the preliminary design document. So that's the rubric, and you can have a look at what the scores are. And submission details, it's group submission, so only one of each group needs to do it. And for now, I'm going to make it unlimited attempts. I might reduce that later on. Okay, so that's the draft preliminary design. While we're here, let's just have a look at the presentation rubric just to make sure that that is in line with what's in the notes as well. And it looks like...
Professor,
Yeah, what's up?
I also just have a quick question. Where do we access the peer journal assessment like this? Like, where do we go to do so? Would that be in a discussion board on Blackboard?
So what are you after?
The peer evaluation where we have to do submissions every week before class.
If you go to Blackboard, there's a thing called journals.
Oh, see, I kept looking in discussion. That makes more sense. Okay.
Right, and then there should be a link under each of the projects, going to the link for peer assessment under journal. Okay.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you about that.
That's okay. So that's a good reminder, though. Please, if you haven't already for this week, please go to your group's peer and self-assessment, and please submit your weekly feedback now. I am finding it quite useful, so please keep doing it. I'll get you to keep doing it for until the last week, which will be May 14th. And so by that stage, we should have 5 or 6 weeks worth of data, and that'll tell me something. For this semester, I'm only going to use it to give qualitative feedback to everybody. So I'll have a look at what you and your teammates are saying, and I'll give you a number. I'll probably rate it between 1 and 10, and 10 being the best and 1 being you never showed up at all ever. That way you can see what hopefully it'll give you some feedback about how you are doing and how your teammates perceive you are doing, right? So because those two things are not necessarily the same thing. Sometimes the way we perceive we work is quite different from the way others perceive us. One other thing. So peer feedback, please do that now while you're on the call. I'm not going to say anything too much important while you do it, except please, I think the me assessments, or at least this course assessments, are coming out tomorrow. So I do appreciate all feedback that I get from students. I tend to prefer looking at the free form submission, right? Because that tends to be a bit more specific about what I can do to improve or what I should keep doing. So please give me feedback on 497, what I've done over the semester. I think it closes May 15th by the looks of things, so you have plenty of time, but please give it as soon as you're willing to, and the sooner the better. Once it opens, I get as you can see from last semester's, I get a thing about response rates. And I very rarely get 100%, but I think I have to get over 60% response rate to make this circle green. Otherwise, if it's not green, it comes in red or yellow, depending on the numbers. So I do like to make sure I get the circle green, if nothing else. That's it for this week. I know I usually finish a little bit early, but I prefer giving you some time during class to interact with your teammates. So please use the time available. Does anybody have any questions about the stuff I've talked about this week? Right? So please get that first draft together, and we'll one thing it might be good is if somebody comes up with a template. I think I had a template, I might see if I can find it, that has all the appropriate sections, but if somebody on one of the teams has a template and shares it in the chat, that would be good. Just so we can get everybody on the same page, and maybe that's something we can discuss next week, is putting together a template and getting everybody to use that template for the preliminary design document. Okay, I don't have anything else. Please do your peer assessments. It's just a matter of a few clicks, so it should be pretty easy. Please be honest with them. I understand that sometimes people can't contribute because life and midterms and other courses get in the way. That happened with the last cohort I took through, but everybody in the cohort was understanding of their teammates, so it worked out. Okay, if there's nothing more, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And please get those draft project preliminary design documents done.
Yes, sir. Have a good rest of your day, Professor.
Okay, you too. Thank you, everyone.